You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today, my guest for the conversation is not only a friend, but she's a sister board member of the Women's Media Center. She's an award-winning author and activist, and she is the director and co-founder of the Women's Media Center Speech Project, about which more in just a moment. But she's also extraordinarily smart and quite a thinker. So the conversation began as a sort of tactical analysis and expanded out into something philosophical about ways of dealing with despair. And I thought we should just retain it as it stands. So that's yet to come. But before we get into any of that, or what follows it, fighting words, we need to go inside the headlines. I didn't cover this story last week when it first broke because I wanted to put it in proper context. It's very important, though. Donald Trump was found liable by a jury for sexually assaulting and defaming the writer E. Jean Carroll. A Manhattan jury found that Trump sexually abused and defamed Carroll and awarded $5 million in damages to her. Carroll accused Trump of sexually assaulting her during a chance encounter at a Manhattan department store. He, of course, had denied her allegations, calling her a liar, and Carroll sued him last year for battery and defamation. She first had publicly accused Trump in 2019, writing in a memoir that same year that they bumped into each other at Bergdorf Goodman, the department store, and that Trump had violently attacked her in a dressing room. Trump lambasted Carroll and accused her of making up the story to sell books. And his attorneys argued during the trial that her story was simply unbelievable. But she testified in graphic detail during the trial about the alleged attack, and Trump, who was under no obligation to appear, didn't testify or even attend the proceedings. Now, this nearly 30-year-old case is one of many to have been brought forward and would not have been possible without the passage of the Adult Survivors Act, the ASA. The ASA, enacted in New York State in May 2022, created a one-year look-back window, which allowed individuals who were 18 or older when they were sexually assaulted and whose case had expired to file a civil lawsuit against the person who harmed them and or the negligent institution. Joe Tacopina, Trump's defense lawyer, who looks and sounds strikingly like a mob attorney, confirmed that Trump would appeal today's decision and press on with his re-election campaign, although several protesters waited outside the court and hurled insults and expletives at Tacopina. There were 6 men and 3 women on the civil jury hearing the case, all of whom were protected from being identified, even to the judge overseeing the case himself. And U.S. District Judge Lewis Kaplan advised the panel not to identify themselves. This was before he discharged them from jury service after the trial. He said, "You each would have the individual right to identify yourself as someone who was on this jury or not. But my advice to you is not to identify yourselves, not now and not for a long time." Close quote. Now that in itself is a very interesting piece of context, that we in this country have now reached a stage where juries have to be kept anonymous. It's a civil jury, so that's one thing. For fear of attack. Well, The majority of the jurors, by the way, were people of color. 9-person jury, 3 women, 6 men. Tacopina, speaking to the press afterward, also said there were lots of issues to appeal, including the decision of this judge to allow the infamous Access Hollywood tape to be presented to jurors, wherein Trump can be heard bragging proudly about grabbing women's genitals without their consent. That he felt was terribly unfair. And he also added that Trump can't get a fair trial in New York City. He said his client is firm in his belief that a fair trial in New York, given the makeup of the jury, is impossible. Well, the jury were New Yorkers, and so was the judge, and presumably Tacopina, but definitely Donald Trump was originally a New Yorker. Kaplan had ruled earlier to keep the jurors' identities secret, citing safety concerns. They were escorted to and from the courthouse by security staff from an undisclosed off-site location. That's also a piece of context that I think is important for us to hear, see, and tisk at the least about. A statute of limitations is a law that sets the amount of time, usually specified in years, that a victim has to come forward and report a crime before prosecution is no longer possible. Applied to sexual violence cases, statutes of limitations add an additional roadblock to access justice for victims. Stigma, shame, intimidation, trauma, and even lack of recognition of the abuse keeps many victims from coming forward, and short statutes of limitations place an overwhelming burden on victims and allow perpetrators to evade punishment. The trauma, stigma, damage, and sometimes continuing threat and fear experienced as a consequence of sexual violence can prevent the victim from reporting the crime, or can delay reporting at the very least. This might be particularly true in the context of childhood sexual violence, when violators might not even be recognized as such by the victim until many years later. We can also look at the time lapse problem in cases of coercive domestic violence or intimate partner situations, or, for example, in the context of conflict, political violence, or social disturbance. Furthermore, a number of jurisdictions, including in the Americas region, such as Bolivia, Ecuador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Paraguay, Peru, etc., calculate statutes of limitations based on the sentence possible for the offense. And this is problematic because sexual violence offenses are often not even recognized as serious crimes that are worthy of commensurate sentences, and therefore the possible sentence for rape can be very low and very light. This means that victims of rape, for example, must contend with both short sentence ranges as well as short time periods for reporting. The Adult Survivors Act has brought New York more in line with international human rights standards, and it's expected to generate many more cases in this state. It's an activist-led grassroots reform that was finally won through and put into place by people like you and me. And it will allow survivors who have lived with sexual assault for years without any recourse because of short statute of limitations to at last have the chance of justice. After all, it takes great courage to come forward to report sexual violence. It's time for our first break, but I'll be back directly with our guest for the conversation, Soraya Chemaly. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
This week's conversation can boast as its guest Soraya Chemaly. She is not only, as I mentioned earlier, an award-winning author and activist who writes and speaks frequently on topics related to gender norms, inclusivity, social justice, free speech, sexualized violence, and technology, but she is the director and co-founder of the Women's Media Center Speech Project. Now, the WMC Speech Project is dedicated to raising public and media awareness about online harassment. You can go online to womensmediacenter.com and browse the Speech Project's archives, which are fascinating in themselves. You can find a WMC report on online harassment, from politicians to ordinary teenagers to institutions. You can find a study on online abuse and its statistics, its scope, its tactics, and its impact. You can discover tools and resources for creating digital space for women and creating your own digital privacy. And you can find ways to counter Gamergate boys and the like. It is an extremely important aspect of the Women's Media Center. I applaud the Women's Media Center for creating it, and it becomes all the more relevant with every passing day as technology catches up with and, in fact, overtakes our species. Now, Soraya is also the author of Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger. She's a contributor to multiple anthologies, including Free Speech in the Digital Age and Believe Me, How Trusting Women Can Change the World. She currently serves on the national boards of the Women's Media Center, Women in Journalism, and the D.C. Volunteer Lawyers Project. She has also served on the boards of Women Action and the advisory councils of the Center for Democracy and Technology, Secular Women, Upsetting Race Culture, and on and on. She is a deep thinker, and we began this conversation about technology, but technology is such an all-encompassing and swift-moving subject nowadays that, as you'll hear, the conversation became more and more philosophical and more about ways to circumvent, combat, and be resilient against despair. Here is Soraya Chemaly. And Soraya, welcome back to Women's Media Center Live. Oh, God, it's good to have you back.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Robin.
I think I'm just going to let you loose. There's so many things to ask you about women and oppression and digital and speech, from, Elon Musk and his idiocies to AI that I'm just going to, what do you think is the cutting edge crisis area right now in all of this? Or is that all of the above?
Well, there's so many dimensions to it. It's such a complex snarl.
Yeah, I know. But if there's anybody able to unravel that, it's you.
Well, that's very kind of you. I doubt that. But, you have so much experience with this. I think it's interesting to compare, just the span, for example, of our lifetimes, right? The changes that have happened.
Uh-huh.
And we kind of live in this era of acceleration, which has lots of impacts on us. But I think it's worth contemplating what it means when we think about the changing social mores that are also affected by the flood of technology.
Yeah.
Because I think we still live in a culture that is enamored of this idea of progress and limitlessness and the virtues of technology, all of which I would say are handily conflated with American masculinity, right? Like
Of course.
the idea that you're free and have no limits. I think a lot about
the world is yours to conquer.
And beyond the world. I mean, the penis rocket contest that we saw last year is, and ironically, just sort of says everything, right?
I know.
Like it's just the colonization of space, and so, the idea that speech has ever been free, like genuinely free, is kind of funny to me. You know, it's always been costly, and it's always been restricted, and it's always been a function of power. I just think this situation we're in now makes that more bluntly obvious.
Well, we have free speech for created false machines that mimic real people's real speech, but we don't have real people's real speech being free, and that's a little confusing. I tell myself, well, things are happening so fast. Maybe it's just that you're getting old, Robin, and to older people, that it always seems like progress is dizzying. But I think things are really ramping up and happening very fast.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's clear. I mean, there's this German sociologist whose work I really like, Harmet Rosa, and he has a theory of modernity that directly addressed accelerationism. And he depressed himself so much in his first book that he sought, I think, to overcome this feeling of despair with a second book about resonance. And I agree with him because he's like, we can't slow it down. None of us as individuals is capable of turning this tide.
No.
So what can we do? And what he talks about is this quality of resonance, which frankly is a lot like, it reflects a lot of the ideas of indigenous ontologies, right, versus Western ontologies, where he's just saying you need to find ways to experience your body and your spaces and your life that are resonant, that bring you these feelings that we're so alienated by the speed of things and by the technological change and the social acceleration that we need to focus on that. Now, that's all well and good to say, and it's sort of a nice aspiration, but in fact, we all have to live in the world we're in. We're all reliant on this technology.
Exactly. So start somewhere. I don't know.
I mean, I think a good place to start is this idea of objective neutral technology.
Okay, explain what that means. Rejecting neutral technology.
Well, I mean, I think the idea is that still prevailing often in common, like, conversation or, even a lot of academic or expert discourse is that the technology is what it is. It isn't infused with people's identities or values or belief systems. And I think that constantly just deserves relentless pushback, right?
I see. It's just a neutral, but it can be a boon or a bane, in other words.
Right, and also that it is inherently neutral. So here's an example. Like in maybe 2014, 2015, I was part of a working group that was looking at online harassment and algorithms, the relationship between developing technology and people's participation in civic life and the public sphere. And there were people at the meeting who were extremely excited because as technologists, they were working with OpenAI to enhance and create machine learning tools for natural language acquisition, which would, it was the foundation of things we are dealing with today, like ChatGPT. And so I happened to say, so what are your sources for these large-scale databases for the machine learning? And the sources were Reddit. Reddit, Mechanical Turk, another similar experiment used Wikipedia. And so I said, okay, so you've taken platforms Mechanical Turk aside, because the demographics are a little different, but certainly Wikipedia and Reddit that are 80 to 90% white men, American, English speaking, English maybe, and you've universalized their discourse and called it human language,
Right.
and that's how you're training, the machines.
And those values become the algorithms.
Those values become the algorithms, but here's here's the example. Like, that conversation sort of developed and was adjacent to another, which was, how do we automate content moderation on platforms? Like, how can a major newspaper not have to have human people processing the frankly terrible and often traumatizing or re-traumatizing commentary that shows up, on articles?
Uh-huh.
And it's also cheaper to have a machine do it. And so there was a prototype that was going to be used at a major national newspaper, and some of us were asked to test it. And the idea was that it would rate comments. So if you said that someone was stupid, it would then come back with, that's either neutral or aggressive or an attack,
Uh-huh.
or harmless, neutral, or an attack. And so I put in, because this is what happens if you're a writer, a woman,
Yeah.
very often, I put in, you should be raped.
You
and
should
it
what?
Came back as,
You should what?
You should be raped. You should be raped.
Oh my God. Okay. All right.
Because that happens, right?
That's right. All the time.
that's
Whenever
what
a
happens.
woman makes it onto the internet. Yeah. Go ahead. Uh-huh.
So it came back, it rated the comment neutral.
Oh.
And then I said, you're a dick. And it came back as an attack.
Oh my God.
So you should be raped would not be removed as a comment in that framework.
But
And so we talked about why that was.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we just, that shouldn't happen. And we just don't have enough sources
uh-huh.
of data that would allow people. I said, well, what if you did? But, it wasn't you should be raped. That came up after. It was nice tits. Nice tits came back neutral. And I said, well, actually, maybe it's just that the people rating your language to train the machine thinks that that's a compliment. And the only way you would think that's a compliment in this context is if you were a woman.
Yeah.
This is not at all complicated at this level. It was just pointing out the way that language mores make their way into language models.
Well, we've known this.
We've
known this that adolescent white males are really the model for the internet for some time. It was created by and for them, and Facebook reflects this. But that it's making it now into the technology itself is very dispiriting. My God.
And we've been talking about words, right? I mean, the fact is that
the attitudes and the values go with them, though.
Go with them. But then again, if you are a woman, and often if you are part of a minority group, it's much more likely that you're also attacked or threatened using content that's image-based. So if we get, for example, to the question of disinformation, political disinformation, right? The worry is often, that people will believe lies and that will ruin political discourse and blah, 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 threats to democracy, all of which is legitimate. So, but a lot of the tools to deal with that problem are text-based. But if you're a woman politician, you've been turned into pornography, your image is turned into memes that are really degrading, demeaning. And so even the predisposition to focus on text erases the experience of the majority of women.
Yeah.
And so then you move to things like deep fakes, which are visual, right?
Uh-huh.
And you'll see that in all the deep fake reports, there's a split made between political deep fakes and pornographic deep fakes. But you can only make that split if you're a man. If you're a woman, pornographic deep fakes are political disinformation.
Of course they
If
are.
you're a gay man, that is also the case because you're virtually feminized. So that happened to Pete Buttigieg, for example. The idea that most harassment happens through text is really kind of intrinsically biased, because people who are minoritized in the culture are more subject to these photo intense and video intense forms of harassment. And as we know, even that technology is making leaps and strides so quickly that we can't keep up. And our legislative processes definitely can't keep up, because their framework is a 19th century framework. They depend on the time it takes to deliberate. And in an accelerationist environment, that becomes a huge risk.
Okay, now that I'm psychotically depressed, oh, tell me, what, if anything, other than regulation, which would be a big help, but we're not going to do it, can we do about this? Even the heads of tech companies came out recently and said,
that's bad. It's bad when that's the case, right? I mean, I think, first of all, there's always this stage when the heads of companies that are facing regulation throw the problems over and say, yes, please regulate us, right? And I think we're seeing some of that. But I also think we're seeing a much greater awareness by our politicians. Too little, too late. And it's true. It is too little, too late. But I would still say that while the regulation and the laws are critically important, the fundamental changes that we need to see are cultural and social, and that actually puts a lot more power back into the hands of people in their communities. Because I just think that, this is the work of feminism broadly, but we really need to be critical of mainstream status quo norms and beliefs and values, and think hard about what they look like when they blow up at scale. It's it's one thing to watch them operate within a family at the dinner table, for example,
right.
Where there might be kind of sexist slights or very conventional traditional norms that support them. But it's an entirely other thing when they're being pushed through this fire hose of technology and the internet.
Of course. Of course. Oh, God. Well, so we have to be more organized. We have to. Who are our leaders other than you? Thank God.
Oh my goodness.
No, but I mean, in I was going to say, in trying to stand up to or lead the drive against the Elon Musks of the world, the you wherever you look, it's Bezos with Amazon. And that's digital, although it's not media, but it is media.
Right.
Of course, it's media.
It is media.
Yeah,
it is media.
And speech itself is so monetized now.
Well, especially extremist speech, right?
Yeah.
We know that the emotionally resonant, effective content is what generates profits for companies.
That's right.
So the whole economics of the system reward that behavior and reward the kind of addictive aspects of our cognition. I think, I think there are many. I mean, there are so many people in organizations doing exceptional work around the world. A lot of the organizations that are pushing back against the spread of this technological culture, which is, white, male supremacist.
Yep.
It's patriarchal. I mean, you can just break it down in any of those ways that you want. And so I think fights that we see that are anti-colonial fights are the fight against the problems we're describing.
Oh, of
fights
course.
Fights that we see to protect land rights. And I mean, the fact is that they're also densely connected, and it's a battle of worldviews, I think.
Yeah, water
really
defenders, human rights defenders,
yes.
They're all the same. And because it is as well, I think, a crisis for them. I mean, that's one of the things I cling to. It's terrifying, but I cling to it because I think, well, they feel threatened. They do feel threatened by us. They feel threatened by women. They feel threatened by people of color. They get absolutely hysterical, and I do use the word advisedly, at the idea of brown people taking over the world. Oh my God. It is like the last agonizing ditch scream of patriarchy. Well, I hope it's the last. I think it's the last. But the question is, can it be done in time?
Right.
And of course, nobody, given the plight of the earth, nobody knows whether that's what the answer to that is. I do think it's a crisis for them as well, though, because otherwise it seems to me that they are acting excessively even for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, as you well know, it doesn't take a lot of people. You just need a small group of people, right? Like, it's similar in my mind to the question of armed militia in America. Most American people are not, they don't endorse far-right extremist Christian ideologies and militarism. They just don't. But at the same time, they're willing to tolerate an enormous amount, which empowers the very small group of people who are armed, who are preparing, who already feel like they're in a civil war.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I think that to go back to this question of what people believe, what their values are, I think it takes a much more intensive form of thinking about those things, not passively just going along or accepting them, being very critical of media,
of course.
Teaching children how to deconstruct ideas. Kids are more than capable of doing those things. As a matter of fact, they do it a lot better than most adults.
Oh, of course they do.
They're digital natives. Yeah, they understand. They understand manipulation and the way that data works. And so,
but that's one of the reasons why books are getting banned, you see. That's one of the reasons why schools are being controlled.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, people understand where power comes from. And, one of the big issues, I think, in the feminist activist world was that for a period there, I think liberal, progressive feminists, because they were working on many other things and also understood motherhood as a particular nexus of oppression, kind of seeded parenting as a result. And conservatives really took that bull by the horn, and they took over school boards, they took over schools, they took over sex ed, and that's very powerful. Now we're seeing, now we're seeing that's conflict, because in fact people woke up and they're like, wait, what is happening?
Yeah.
Are
you addressing some or most or any of this in the new book?
So my new book is basically about the ways in which our resilience culture, our mainstream resilience culture, really hurts our resilience. Really, it makes it very difficult to adapt, to change, to be cognitively flexible, to envision and imagine new ways of living in the world together, right?
Wow.
And so I do think about these things because, in fact, the kind of resilience that developed, particularly in the wake of 9/11, was such an ethno-macho phenomenon. It was, and it really hurt us, for example, during COVID.
Sure.
I mean, after 9/11, resilience meant going out, living your life, embracing freedom, being an American who wasn't scared to, go places and do things. And I remember that sort of George Bush line that everybody kind of was like, go shopping. But in fact, that was a very specific way of being resilient. When COVID hit, people thought, I'm going to be resilient, and then they decided that's what I have to do. So instead of being cognitively flexible and adapting to the threat at hand, a virus that wasn't actually like some little mini brown terrorist, they went out, they did things, they lived life normally, which actually was the worst possible thing you could have done.
Right. Well, there was no encouragement or even invitation or access into, how shall we call this, the contemplative life. And I don't mean contemplation, obviously, in terms of,
Yes.
religion, but I mean any kind of intellectual endeavor, any kind of cognitive elasticity, any kind of thoughtfulness, just to stop for a moment and turn off Facebook or chat box. I mean, and think for a while. I mean, I used to do a lot of my thinking on long walks, which I can't do anymore because of Parkinson's and because walking is not my friend. But reading still is, and sitting sometimes in front of the fire or just sitting in a chair and thinking is. And I wonder about, God, here I'm going to sound like somebody who's really 102. But I do wonder about younger people not having that access, not having that space of quiet, unless it's called meditation, which is okay. Call it whatever you want to call it. But it is an exercising a part of one's self that is absolutely key to health and survival. Don't you think?
Right. It's interesting that you say that because, one of the things, first of all, about meditation is that now, of course, it's being co-opted in that self-help industry.
Exactly.
As a way for you to be more productive.
Yeah.
Meditate so that you can be more productive, right? Which is so ass backwards.
Absolutely.
It defies, it kind of defies anything, the real purpose, right? But what you're describing is that quality of resonance, which is to sit quietly, the purpose being the quiet itself. Also, though, I think that it's difficult sometimes, certainly for me as a progressive feminist, to really focus on the quality of fear that people have with change. Like, if you are conservative, you feel much higher rates of fear and disgust and contempt. And those feelings, they drive behavior, right? They drive xenophobia, they drive homophobia, they drive misogyny, they're why
and they drive violence. I mean, if it bleeds,
totally
it does lead. It does lead.
It does, and it leads to this feeling of virtuous violence, which is that I am the moral right.
Right. Exactly.
But I do think it's really important to understand that psychology because I, like you, am constantly thinking, well, and now I'm also constantly thinking you can't. I'll just say that. But how can you persuade people? How can you talk to people? How can you listen to people and understand where they're coming from and then maybe move them along in this other direction? I'm not convinced that can happen, right? But we all try.
We do.
We all dedicate ourselves to trying to do that, which may or may not be Pyrrhic. But
the problem is that you need some kind of common frame of reference in order to do that.
You do, and this is the other problem with this technology because, as you point out, it's going so fast, it's so fragmented, and because it's based on these effective, resonant emotional responses, it's shredded the social fabric. There's no social trust. There's no trust in information. There's no shared reality. And that is really, really dangerous, right? Like, how do you create a new shared reality out of the destructiveness of the last 20 years?
You can create it. You can create 20, 30,000 of it for that matter. But how can you trust any of it? Any one of that thousandth realities?
Yeah, I mean, how do you build social trust in this environment? And I don't know that we have good answers to that. I am heartened by, I don't know if you're familiar with the democracy table conversations that happened in Ireland in the build-up to the vote on abortion.
No.
I wasn't. I think it's fascinating because Ireland, of course, so rigidly Catholic and anti-abortion, right?
Right. It was a delight. It was incredible when they turned around.
It was an amazing thing when they turned it around. And so what they did all over Ireland at the community level, local conversations, is they set up these democracy. They're like I don't remember what their formal name was, but they were tabled to discuss conflicting beliefs.
Uh-huh.
And they set up many, like you'd get a town hall, you'd put 20 tables in it. There were trained moderators and people who understood sort of arbitration, and people of extremely different views would come together. There were members that were supposed to represent the community, and these were formal processes. The conversations weren't structured, but the processes themselves were formalized. And they had these conversations, and they did change people's minds, and it sort of cultivated more compassion and understanding and built social trust. And that was really very important to the changes that we saw.
Interesting. Of course, it's more possible in a country that size.
And homogeneous, and like so many things go into that.
That's right, and large, almost totally white.
Totally. I mean, even in this country, just race segregation in housing makes that.
Oh, you've got it. Yeah, you've got it in housing. You've got it in language. You've got it in so many different things. Now, Dia Khan, who has been a guest on this program a number of times, wonderful filmmaker. And wise woman. I was saying, but we can't do this one at a time. There's no time. And she said, we may have to.
I think so.
And it leaves me agape, because we do have 300 million, people in this country.
Yes.
And
I have a point of comparison. I'm from the Bahamas. We had a really catastrophic hurricane there in 2019, Hurricane Dorian.
Right.
And until then, I think that I really psychologically distanced myself from climate change because I couldn't deal with the threat that the entire country would go away.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what we're talking about.
Right.
And so that hurricane disabused me of that luxury.
Yeah.
That sort of optimism bias that a lot of us engage in to fend off the fear of, and anxiety of climate change. But I also, like you, look for things that people are doing that I'm very, very grateful for. And one of the things that I recently found that seems quite astounding given the scope of the problem, as you just described, is that in Colombia, there are now people who are coral farmers, and they have created, they go down into a reef, they take a little bit of coral, they break it into lots of pieces, and they essentially harvest and cultivate and farm it. Mm-hmm. And they are now on track to reseed 1 million beds of coral this way.
Oh, how amazing. Oh, God.
And it is amazing, right? But I think, okay, there's that actually has to happen over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Well, and it is in some ways. I mean, it's just, again, not enough. I mean, but it is in many ways. There are these little incremental small gestures that are being made by people all over the planet, and particularly, I must say, by the young, who get climate change, who really get it, because it's the air they breathe, and it's a daily urgency to them. So that's where I place my trust and my hope and my, my crazy optimistic certainty that we will prevail. And but it's a very hairy passage,
It can get very demoralizing. Like if you don't, it's. And again, also, I will say this, although I'll probably put you into further depression, that turn into that inward turn, that small scale turn, it really comes with so many risks, right? Because, and I will say this also comes with this notion of resilience. I was talking to a young woman, and whenever I'm approached by women on the internet who are trying hard to make change and have voices, I really want to support them as much as possible. And so I said yes, I would talk to her. We were doing an Instagram live, and And she said something that I think many people feel. She said, some of these problems are so overwhelming that I just focus on what I can control. Because in fact, that notion that you should focus on what you can control is really central to our ideas about how to be resilient.
Mm-hmm.
You do what you can do and have a sense of optimism and hope based on that. And I said to her, well, that's true, but sexism isn't something, for example, that you can control or do anything personally about.
Right.
And she said, well, that's true, but I can't do anything, so I just put it out of my mind.
Oh, God.
And I really had this sinking feeling, because that's like the most neoliberal subjectivity you can imagine, right? Like, I'm just going to go into myself and I'm going to girl boss my way out of this problem.
Well, it's ostrich, thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so we had an interesting conversation about that. But I do think that what she said is very common.
Yeah. Well, Soraya, here we are, you and I, two little pop-up dolls, the kind of dolls that you put them flat and they go boing, and they
boing, hey, me again,
and they're back on their little blown-up feet.
to buttress what you're saying, I think people feel like the end of the world is coming sometimes, and the Anthropocene is here, and I just think it's important to think in terms of the end of a type of world might be imminent, right?
Exactly.
Like other cultures and people have experienced the ends of their world.
They certainly have. Think about when Rome fell.
Yes, yes. But, even with this idea of anthropogenic change being dated to 1952, the Earth's climate was shifted by indigenous genocide in the 1500s, right? Like, so many people died that the Earth cooled because they weren't engaging in agriculture the way they had been a century before, and so I think it's really important to put things in perspective that way. It's horrifying and scary to think about. I don't dismiss that, but I do also think that if you're open and creative and love the world and understand that the power comes from our connections, it's not that bad.
That's right. And the planet, of course, also has a mind of its own, whether you call it Gaia or whatever.
I know.
So it has plans for itself, however unconscious they may be. And I would recommend that people read Robinson Jeffers, the great American poet, much overlooked, but who often envisions a continent without people on it. And it's very interesting what happens.
It is very interesting. Also, I think, I don't know I think it's Mushrooms at the End of the World. Let me see. I think that's it. Yes, The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anna Singh. She's a Chinese-American anthropologist.
The Mushroom at the End of the World.
The Mushroom at the End of the World. And, I think it's just that if you embrace vital materialism and you start thinking about the world in ruins in a different way, like that whole phrase, the world in ruins, takes on different meanings for different people. But centering non-human life in the poems that you were just talking about, or books like this one, I think, we don't do that enough.
Absolutely, we don't do that enough. And it may be the answer to it all. Oh, my dear. Well, I hope we get to do this in person again soon. Take care of your dear, dear, dear self, Soraya. And finish that book and get it out. What's it called?
Oh, my gosh.
What's it? What do we have a title?
That's a good question. No, we have a title that is currently Reimagining Resilience.
Reimagining Resilience. Oh, it's a good title.
Yes.
Good
Oh,
title.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I have no objectivity, no feelings left about it.
That's
This is
classic.
my current state.
Classic.
At
but
this point.
I'm waiting for it. And it will be
Well,
out.
thank you.
It'll be out in the fall.
It'll be out 2024.
2024. Okay. Well, you have to come back and talk about it then. At that point.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I love talking to you. I'm so glad. I know, even though it was to do the podcast and not to sit and relax, we'll do that another time.
We have to take a final break here, but I'll be back in just a moment with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Inhumanism. Now there's a fighting word for you. Actually, inhumanism is a word coined by the American poet Robinson Jeffers to describe an admirably aspirational, different reality, which is not human-centric, which does not center the human being. All other living things, in fact, all other things in the cosmos, have equal value. Now, these days, to even imagine a non-human-centered cosmos is itself quite shocking. Jeffers, who died in 1962, was a severe and crusty poet, but not a cruel one, if you get my meaning. He lived on the West Coast in the beautiful Big Sur area of California, in a house that he and his wife, Una, built by hand from rocks in the area. He was somewhat of a hermit, but he wrote stunning poetry of great power, and his verse about the natural beauty of the world is almost unmatchable. He wrote mostly narrative and even epic poems, book-length poems, like Medea and Roan Stallion, the story of a brutalized wife and her passionate relationship with a great horse, and Tamar, the story of a wild, defiant love between a brother and a sister, and The Women at Point Sur, which I will not even attempt to describe because, well, you must read it. He also wrote short poems, like the famous Shine, Perishing Republic, and this one, The Broken Balance, from which I'm going to read a few short fragments. Mourning the broken balance, the hopeless prostration of the earth under men's hands and their minds, the beautiful places killed like rabbits to make a city, the spreading fungus, the slime threads and spores, my own coasts, obscene future, I remember the farther future, and the last man dying without succession under the confident eyes of the stars. It was only a moment's accident, the race that plagued us. The world resumes the old, lonely, immortal splendor. From here I can even perceive that snuffed candle had something, a fantastic virtue, a faint and unshapely pathos. All summer neither rain nor wave washes the cormorant's perch, and their droppings have painted it shining white. If the excrement of fish-eaters makes the brown rock a snow mountain at noon, a rose in the morning, a beacon at moonrise on the black water, it is barely possible that even men's present lives are something their arts and sciences by moonlight not wholly ridiculous, nor their cities merely an offense. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at The Robin Morgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor Regina K. Scully, WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.